It's time to begin a new unit, and this material will be tested on the next lecture exam. So as we head into this unit, we need to start with two vocabulary words, coelom and viscera. Let's start with coelom. The bad news is it's a little tricky to spell and to pronounce, but the good news is you already know the definition. Coelom is just another word for the ventral body cavity. So if you go all the way back to our very first week, you might recognize this image. The coelom includes all the subdivisions that you already know. So the thoracic cavity and the abdominal pelvic cavity, and then the subdivisions within each of those. The second term is viscera, and viscera is defined as all of the organs within the coelom. So this image is certainly not including all of them, but it has some very familiar ones. This is a bunch of digestive system organs, and since they are housed within the ventral body cavity, within the coelom, they're technically considered viscera. Now, you may be familiar with that word, and especially words that derive from it, like eviscerated. And most people, when they think viscera, they associate it with the intestines. So it's true that the intestines are viscera, but viscera is so much more than just intestines. Now, this topic, coelom and viscera, is important because it's going to lead us into all the other organ systems this semester. Every organ system that we cover from here on out is going to have at least one organ that is considered viscera because it's found within the coelom. So before we go on, I want to talk a little bit about why have a coelom at all? What are the advantages to having a coelom? Because it turns out not all animals have them. And one huge advantage is that it allows your viscera to grow and to move relative to one another. So when you consider an image like this one of the digestive tract, imagine, of course, that not everything just stays static in place. Your stomach can expand each time you eat a meal, and in doing so has to kind of push against other organs. Your intestines, both small and large, are all moving around as they move, what was food and is quickly becoming feces as they move them through the tract. The urinary bladder, not labeled, but down here, that of course can expand as it fills. And so all of that and more, if you consider up in the thoracic cavity, the beating of the heart, the inflating and deflating of the lungs with inhalation and exhalation, all that's possible because these organs are housed within a cavity. And finally, perhaps the most extreme example of all, the uterus, also not labeled here, but most of the time it's just tucked down out of the way in the pelvic cavity, unless of course it's occupied. And then it expands and expands and expands over many, many months, up till kind of epic proportions, pushing the other viscera out of the way. None of that would be possible without a coelom. So I want to take a little side trip into zoology for a moment. This is a figure from a zoology textbook, and I mentioned that not all animals have a coelom. Those that do, such as humans, are called coelomates. And this picture is also really important because it's going to introduce these three, what we call sacred colors. And I'll explain what each of those means in a different portion of this lecture. But the red, the blue, and the yellow all represent embryonic tissue types that are shared across the animal kingdom. And I think it's really useful to take a cross-section of three different kinds of worms to show you what it means to have a coelom. It's nice to look at this earthworm up here, this annelid worm, even though, of course, that seems, human body is so much more complicated. But really, we form a coelom just like they do. So take a look. In all three cases, the blue coloring is used for the outer body tissue. Right? So that doesn't change. And also in all three cases, the yellow coloring is used to show the lining of the digestive tract. So whether you're a coelomate or not. The difference then between these three worms is what's going on with their red tissue, the tissue in the middle. If you start down here, this critter, a flatworm, like a planarian, do you remember planaria? Maybe from Bio 10, you got to look at them under a dissecting scope. In any case, they're one of my favorite invertebrates. They have this amazing power of regeneration. So if you actually cut a planaria like they did here, and you left it in its water, it would grow a new head on this side and a new tail on that side. You can even cut it in such a way like this where it will sprout two heads. They have super cool stem cells. But anyways, back to this picture. Look at what's going on. The red tissue completely fills in between the yellow and the blue. So they don't have a coelom. They don't have a body cavity because that is completely filled in with tissue. And therefore they're called acoelomates, meaning, well, literally, they don't have a coelom. Without a body cavity, they're still extremely successful animals. In fact, they outnumber humans by far on this planet, but they can't have the complex organ systems. They don't have organs that move relative to one another like we do. This one in the middle, this type of worm, is a nematode. You also looked at these in Bio 10 under a dissecting scope. You would have looked at probably vinegar eels, kind of wriggling around in that apple cider vinegar. Anyways, vinegar eels and nematodes in general are what we call pseudocoelomates. And remember, pseudo means false. So these are the ones that seem like they have a coelom, but it's a fake coelom. And why is it a fake coelom? Because I clearly see a body cavity in here, right? This white area is supposed to represent some sort of cavity. But that cavity is sandwiched between the yellow tissue and the red tissue. And that is not a true coelom. Why not, you ask? Well, because a true coelom, as seen in the coelomates such as ourselves and earthworms, is a body cavity that is completely surrounded by this red tissue. So you see how there's part of the cavity here and the other part right there labeled as a coelom because on all sides it has the red tissue. Now again, we'll return to what does that actually mean that it's the red tissue? And of course it says right here that it's from mesoderm. But the important thing for now is to appreciate we have a coelom, we have viscera within that coelom, and not all animals are built the same way.